So we already know how to do our step 1, which is coming up with our claim and then coming up with our H0 and our H1 based on which symbols you have. Then your H1, I know that we always test H0, but your H1 is going to determine always, no matter where the claim is, always H1 will determine what kind of picture we're looking at. And it's going to determine if you're looking at, if you've got a less than, you're going to be looking at a left-tailed picture. If you've got a greater than, you're going to be looking at a right-tailed picture, and a not equal to, you'll be looking at what's called a two-tailed picture. So then you'll be able to draw a graph. So if your H1 has a less than, we said you'd have a left-tailed picture, so you can draw a standard normal curve, and you can fill that in, kind of shade in an area to the left because of the less than. If your H1 has a greater than, you'd be looking at a right side or right-tailed normal curve. And if your H1 has a not equal to, it means don't take the middle, take the ends. So you'll have two ends, two tails as we put it. What's nice is whatever is in the first tail will be the same as whatever value is in the second tail. And then what we'll do is we'll say that the area in the tail, or if it's two-tailed, tails, is going to be what's called your p-value. That's going to be the goal of all this, is to take some z-values, find the area in the tail or tails, and that area in the tail or tails, depending on if it's one-tailed or two-tailed, left-tailed or right-tailed, is going to be what's called a p-value. And that's going to be what we really care about. That's why this whole testing is called using p-values. At least this first type that we're going to do is called hypothesis testing using p-values, because we're finding a p-value. So what do we do with this p-value once we have it? Well, we'll ask ourselves a question, and the answers will always be one or the other, and it will tell us whether we're going to reject or fail to reject. But how do we get the p-value? Guess what? Our calculator can do everything for us. You'll go ahead and press the stat key. Done this before. Just like we were doing in Chapter 7 to get the confidence intervals, then we'll arrow to the right twice. Over to tests. We'll see the same exact list we saw back in Chapter 7, except for when we were doing confidence intervals for proportions, we did a 1 prop z int. Now the only difference is instead of a 1 prop z int, instead of the int, we're going to be doing a test because we're testing a claim. So we're going to be testing claims for proportions. So we'll be doing hypothesis testing for proportions, which is why we're going to do a 1 prop z test. It's going to want almost the exact same information we gave it for confidence intervals, just a tiny bit extra. So once you select test and then go down to 1 prop z test and select it and press enter, it'll tell you exactly what it wants. The first thing that it wants is a p naught. See the little 0? That means they want the proportion from your null hypothesis. So whatever proportion or probability that you found in your null hypothesis. The way that I remember that is the little 0 on the P naught here, and the little 0 from the H naught means you want the number from the H naught. It's a good little reminder. So in my first example, I'm going to use a P naught or P from the H naught, the null hypothesis of 0.53. And you guys can run this. I'm just making these numbers up just to kind of practice. Then the next thing that they want is actually coming from your experiment, your sample, is they want your X. Is for this proportion what actually happened when you went and did a sample. Well, your top number for your proportion is your X. Remember, you have a P hat we did this way back when. And then the X is on the top, the N is on the bottom. So they're asking for that X first. And then they want your N, your sample size from your sample. Second, that was, remember, your denominator from your P hat. The next part comes from knowing which symbol was in your H1. Remember, H1 always has remember that H1 either has a not equal to, a less than, or a greater than. And in this one, I'm using a not equal to, which means it's behind the scenes going to go ahead and draw a two-tailed picture. Remember, not equal to means it's going to draw a two-tailed picture. I would go ahead and make sure that you kind of have that picture in your mind, because there'll be other sections where they don't give us the picture and do everything for us. So let's get into that habit, at least knowing what that picture looks like. And then you'll go all the way down to the bottom and press calculate, just like before when we did for confidence intervals, and the calculator does all the heavy lifting for us. It finds the Z that makes up one of our tails, actually finds the area for that tail. Because it's two-tailed, it multiplies it by 2, and that is your p-value. You do need to understand this, is the p-value is the area already added up in this one because the not equal to in both tails. And how is it the area in both tails? It's the area in both tails created by that Z value that's right on top of it. Then the question is, what do you do with your p-value? Well, just like always, you're going to ask yourself one question. This question won't change ever. Whether you're left-tailed, right-tailed, two-tailed, it will always stay the same. You're going to ask yourself if the p-value you just came up with, is that less than or equal to what's called our alpha? Our alpha is what's called our level of significance. So level of significance. And it has to be given in the problem, no matter what. Now, again, the answers to this question are not going to change either. If you say yes, you'll reject H0. If you say no, you're going to fail to reject H0. Because remember, we're always testing things on H0. And then when you're done, you'll say, okay, well, what does this mean about my claim? Because sometimes H0 is my claim, sometimes it's not. So then you need to write some final statement about the claim. So this is a good summary, and what you may want to put on your sheet is either how to access these tests using your calculator if you keep forgetting what buttons to press, but you also are probably going to want to include this question, because we're going to see this question each and every section that we do in Chapter 8, and it's going to keep on popping up. The question doesn't change, the answers don't change, so you may or may not want to include that.